I don't underestimate the power of moving my body because it helps me to move energy. When I am in a stuck space and if I don't move, it just festers. I watched a video the other day that really stuck with me, and it said that emotions that run through your body, they last for 90 seconds. That's it. So if the emotion is in you longer than that, now it's not the emotion, you're feeding on the story.
Right. It's almost as if the mind knows that that's false, right? So you're just sitting there telling yourself something puts you in a loop of, am I a liar? I don't believe this, right? As opposed to if you parallel it with physical exertion and you've never run a mile before and you run a mile, then that means that, you've broke a limiting belief about yourself in a way. It almost seems counterintuitive, right? It's like, well, success sounds great, right? So then what really is it? Is it that you have to turn into someone you're not right now?
I think that is like one of the best questions that I've ever been asked. And I love this because I'm just going to follow my gut on it because I've been there, right? I've been there and I've done this and I've firsthand have done it. I think that.
Hey friends, you're tuned in to the Learn or Be Learned podcast, a show where wisdom meets curiosity in order to discover the human experience. I'm your host, Shiva D, and remember, you either learn from or you're learned from. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, welcome back everybody to another great episode. Today's guest is Marsha Vanwynsberghe. So I actually had to practice that before the recording and we got it. So here we are today. Thank you, Marsha, for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Shiva, for having me, and good job on the name.
Marsha, do you mind telling a little bit about yourself for the audience?
Absolutely. First off, thank you for having me. Second, I am a whole bunch of things, but really, I am a parent who spent many years struggling with teen substance abuse, hiding from the world, really starting to deep dive and understand what shame is and how stuck I felt in a story. And through a lot of work and hitting some really ugly low spots, decided that I wanted to be able to do something good with my story. And it opened up doors that I could have never, ever anticipated. It helped me to heal. It helped me to reach people in so many different ways. And it's led to two podcasts, multiple books, and speaking and coaching. And really, at the heart of it is helping people to learn how to overcome, share, put a voice to their vulnerable story with the intention of helping others.
Right. Something I've noticed is often the most vibrant people are ones that have worked on their mental and physical health, right? So you see people that work on their physical health and they're much more vibrant people, and people that work on their mental health as well, because those are two things that money can't buy. Those are earned. You have to go through the hard work.
That's so true. I don't know where I would be.
So, Marsha, would you mind sharing a little bit about, what work you did, how you managed to go through that self-discovery?
Absolutely. That is a great question. I hit some very, very low points, and those points really came from feeling like I was the only person in the world who was struggling. And I think that's what happens is when we're in those moments, we assume that no one gets us, no one understands what we're going through, and we're the only person in the world who's struggling. And that's because we're just in this, I was in this bubble of thinking about myself and how it looked. And so through that time, I started to reach out. This is going to be 8+ years ago. So YouTube became a very good friend of mine. I started listening to videos on repeat, nonstop,
Mhm.
and podcasts were just starting. But there was something that I learned that really made a difference for me early on. And whether people like him or not, I learned a lot from Tony Robbins about state. And that was something that helped me to understand that I can't navigate a really difficult time when my state is constantly like in the gutter, which is where it was. And so, what could I do to change my state? And that was so many things. I had mantras, I had words, I had journaling, I had exercise became a priority. The second my state would drop, it would be like, nope, we need to go back to a video again. And it was so much repeat of the same things over and over, because if it changed my state and elevated a little bit, then all of a sudden I was able to handle a situation, a really difficult situation. And so it was feedback. I was creating this feedback of what state and what helps me to change my state. So many different things,
Mm,
but that's really where it started from, because when I was in a better state, I could respond better to what we were dealing with as opposed to reacting. And I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings, is that I was really good at reacting. Like, I was really good at losing it,
mm,
reacting. But when you're in that state, you're expending your energy constantly and nothing is changing. And so I really had to start to look and go, okay, how can I support my state? And one of my counselors at that time gave me the analogy that you can throw gas on every fire or you can throw sand. The more you react and you blow up at every single thing happening, you're throwing gas. But the problem is, when you throw gas, you get burned too. And so I had to learn how to change my state so I
right,
could react. And that has stuck with me forever.
right. That's so powerful because I think mindset is often the way I see it is like a spectrum, right? It's the equivalent to eating one bad donut. It's not gonna make you overweight, but if you eat a donut every day and then you compound that, so that's where you see the effects, right? And the same thing with mental health is it's not that one bad thought that's gonna go anywhere. It's the repetition that puts you down a spiral. And same thing with the positive mindset, it almost feels it's almost frustrating because it feels like it's not working when you're
Mhm.
constantly trying to get out of a rut and doing that positive motivations and speeches and stuff, and you might feel a burst of energy here and then it's back to baseline.
Mhm.
And I think it's the same way. It's that compound growth that can be kind of frustrating to get out of, right?
Ye you said it exactly, and I think you don't ever recognize that compound growth when you're in the middle of it. It doesn't look like you're getting anywhere. It doesn't look like anything is
Mm,
changing until you can look back one day and go, "Wow, like, I did handle this really differently than I would have before," and you start to recognize it. But I really like to emphasize that for anyone who's ever listening, is that it's never just one thing, and it's never one thing done once. It's so much repetition that it requires that much stacking in order to change how you show up, how you respond. And when you start to do that, then you start to collect those wins. But it definitely was a lot of work.
right. I mean, you had even mentioned that you were constantly on YouTube to kind of block out that negative noise, right? So it's like it's all that stacking and momentum you had to build to get out of there is the that initial launch, right? What do they say with a rocket? It's like 80% of the fuel is used for the launch. It's exactly like that
Mhm.
with the
Mhm.
mindset, right? Getting out of there.
I love that you said that example, because there is a reel or something that I saw online that has stuck with me, that 80% of the effort is in the launch. And then the other, I don't know rocket
Mhm.
parts, but the other thing is the pieces that fall off once it hits a certain point. And it's because the rocket doesn't need them anymore in order to keep going. And if you really think about that, you can equate that to
Mhm.
people as well, right? Like, as you start that trajectory and you move, you will lose parts of yourself. You will lose people. You will lose things that aren't meant to go on that next stage of the journey with you. And when I think back to that time, I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know, but it was very, very isolating because it was like watching people falling off and dropping off and leaving, mainly because they didn't know what to say, or our story scared people, or it was just who knew what to say. And I did carry a lot of anger and frustration for a
Mm.
while until I recognized that, like, Marsha, you're living in it day in, day out, and you don't even know what to say or do. So how in the world is someone else going to know what to say? And it just put it back in perspective.
Right. What was your outlet for the frustration and anger that you faced at times?
Definitely workouts. There's no question. Definitely workouts, which is funny because when I started getting back into a regular routine of working out again, I took up hot yoga, which I love the heat. It was really good for me, but it was incredibly painful to sit on my mat. Incredibly painful. Like, it was so painful that it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And this is why, is because when you're in a difficult time, I was replaying the past over and over, right? Like on a loop. I just replayed, what mistake did I make? What was going wrong? What was happening? And so I replayed that. There was this fear of what the future was going to look like. And the present was worse than both of them combined, because the present was when I was looking at all of it. And yoga
Mm.
was being in the present. So I remember when I first started, it was so uncomfortable. I had tears. I didn't want to be there, but I kept feeling like, you have to be here right now. I think this is very important. And then from there, everything from, I've done all kinds of workouts, from CrossFit to weight to nature walks and dog. I don't underestimate the power of moving my body, because it helps me to move energy when I am in a stuck space. And if I don't move, it just festers. I watched a video the other day that really stuck with me, and it said that emotions that run through your body, they last for 90 seconds. That's it. So if the emotion is in you longer than that, now it's not the emotion, you're feeding on the story. And that, just like, I felt like that was such a mind-blowing moment. So when I feel that stuck feeling, it's like I have to move in some way, shape, or form. Like, it's not that I'm not afraid of sitting with it, but I won't sit and fester. I want to sit, ask questions, get curious, but then move.
Wow, that's actually a really powerful point, because something I've realized is it's the physical stamina and mental stamina are almost parallel, right? It's oftentimes if you can physically push yourself, you're able to build that mental fortitude as well. Because I've noticed, when you're in a mentally weak spot, even things as such as cold showers are too inconvenient, right? Or hot yoga, and it's those little things that makes you realize that your mental fortitude is weakened, and that's probably why you're in a feedback loop, right? Is I don't know. I noticed when I watched videos from David Goggins, who's
Yep.
really big on, physical stamina, and the guy's got, you know, mental cage is like a steel trap. You
He
can't you
does.
can't, penetrate him with emotions. He's so strong-willed, right? And I think part of that comes from the fact that he's pushed his body to limits that most people can't even begin to understand. Can only imagine what that does to your mental health too, right?
I think that's a great example. I think that, I mean, I love his work. I love listening to him. I found his book very powerful. I don't know how many times while even listening to it, I thought I would never, I would have been done. But that's just who he is. But I
Yeah.
think the physical amplifies the mental, and I think the mental is requires as much devotion. I love listening to biographies, athletes, things like that, and I can't tell you how many times you hear them say that it's not the physical that gives out; the mental will give out long before the physical. And so I think they both are important.
Right. It's almost amazing how powerful the mind is, because your mind will tap out way before your body's going to tap out. So if you can develop that strength, then, emotions also can be, conquered or overcome in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I completely agree. I completely agree. And I've spent the last 2 years learning more about NLP and neurolinguistic programming, going through a lot of different certifications. And it really is powerful when you understand how powerful your mind is and what your mind is capable
Mm,
of. And I'm not talking there's still a lot of talk about like the fake toxic positivity. Like if you just keep saying the affirmations, you're going to create the change. I don't believe in that. I really don't.
right.
And I think it's a really slippery toxic slope for people who are trying to create change, because we're still holding on to all of the things that don't align with that. So it's about learning the power of those
Right.
emotions, right, and releasing that, and that's how you change the story.
Right. It's almost as if the mind knows that that's false, right?
Mhm.
So you're just sitting there telling yourself something puts you in a loop of, am I a liar? I don't believe this,
Mhm.
right? As opposed to if you parallel it with physical exertion and you've never run a mile before and you run a mile, then that
Mhm.
means that, you've broke a limiting belief about yourself in a way.
And that's it, by pushing past that ceiling, going into something that you didn't think that you could do. And just to paint a picture, like during those early years, I, I wasn't even thinking of thriving. I was just trying to figure out how to survive another day. And so, if I made it through another day, it was like, okay, what worked today? What didn't? What worked? What didn't? And we're humans. I think that it's very easy for us to think of adding more and doing more. There was a lot of times during those years that it was like, what's not working and what can go? And that can save you just as much resources as adding on a good thing, because we're all doing things on a daily basis that aren't serving us. And so, again, if you've got these habits here that aren't supporting you and you're trying to add good things on top of it, it doesn't matter because it's still crappy underneath. So you have to sometimes just take away things that aren't working. And that was a big piece of what I had to learn and grow through.
Right. And the idea of being alone in it is probably so powerful. It probably resonates with so many people because it can be kind of challenging to share what you're going through, how it makes you feel, especially because of the relatability aspect. I think a
Hmm.
lot of people have different problems, and it's hard to relate to somebody and give them the advice that you want to give, but you don't know what it is.
Hmm.
How did you deal with that period?
It's funny because when I look back at it, it's a great question. I'm like, how did I do that? I think one of the things, right? Yeah. I think one of the things that I really started to understand and get curious about is what was serving my energy and what wasn't. So I had to
Mm,
create little mantras that I said the words to myself every single day over and over. But my inner circle became an invite only space. You didn't get access, you didn't get close, and I had people close to me, but I was so clear on what was serving me and what wasn't. And that meant that even family didn't get a pass. Nobody got a pass to having access, because we were in just this space that I had to find a way to get to another day. And so boundaries, I really
yeah.
did a lot of work of understanding what boundaries were, and not just physical, but emotional, energetic, all of these pieces. Boundaries became huge, and I really started to recognize how I didn't have any, like at all. And I know the quote, I'm not getting it exactly, but it's not, the people who have the most difficulty with your boundaries are the ones who benefited from you having none in the first place. And so when I didn't have
Right.
any,
Wow.
right, it was like, and all of a sudden I started to put them into place, and it was like disrupting everybody. But it was like, oh, wait, I feel a little bit better than the day before. And so and that's all that mattered.
Uh,
I use and I reference
right.
Brene Brown's quote a lot, where she talks about like the man in the arena, right? Who's in the arena with you for support? But I would actually take it one step further. And if you're in the arena on the floor and you're taking advice from people who aren't even in the arena, or people who are in the 500 seats spitting down advice at you, then why am I worried about what they're saying if they're not walking with me? And so I took it even further. And it's like I was only going to take advice and support from people who were actually walking on the arena floor with me. And that was it. So there were actually times that even people, family, that I had to get to a point of saying, I'm sorry, are you offering to come and live in my house for weeks so I could maybe go get some sleep? Because I haven't slept for years. Oh, you're not offering. Okay, then I'm not interested in your opinion. Like, and I would just say, I'm not interested
Mhm.
in your opinion. And so I had these boundary statements that I started to practice saying that helped me to protect my energy. And the interesting thing is when you do that, you actually start to build a little bit more of your self-worth. And I think that's something that more of us are challenged with than what we realize. And you have to start to honor who you are, what you need, give back to yourself. Then you start to see and really understand that, wait, I am worthy of being surrounded with people who, love, care, and support and want the best for me. And I don't need 1,000 people in my circle. A good handful of really quality people is all that matters. So I would say boundaries were definitely one of the biggest things. And then that second piece on self care that you touched on earlier is really understanding that my self care was my responsibility. And I had to find a way to pour that back into me. And
Mm.
both of those things led to me really understanding and creating this loop of what radical responsibility was and what owning my choices was and how to own my choices and stop owning others. And it just became this loop that I just kept repeating every day, but that helped me to get to a space to feel stronger, to start to openly share my story. I couldn't have done it in the beginning. I was an absolute mess, honestly, at that time. There's no way I could have handled the opinions and judgments and criticisms of others. But as I started to get stronger, those comments had far less effect on me than they did in the beginning.
Right. That's so powerful because I think many people are often afraid to take that accountability because accountability is not easy. It's looking at every situation, good or bad, is to look at it and say, well, in some fashion, this is also my fault, right? Perhaps it's boundaries. You didn't set boundaries, and that's your fault, right? So
Mhm.
it's taking that acceptance of I could have done something, and I think it's much easier to just stick to the, often victim mentality or the world is happening to me, not for me mentality. And that's that's very powerful what you said.
Mm.
I'm trying to think of what are some other examples of boundary statements that served you well.
Hmm. I think some other examples is I would ask myself, like, is this supporting me? Is this someone who wants to walk beside me? Now, that I also want to clarify, that doesn't mean that I only had people in my life who 100% agreed with me, because I also had friends who would, be able to say, Marsha, no, this is not okay what you're doing. And so it's really
Hmm.
important to surround yourself with that as well. I think the boundaries also comes to the example of self-care, in the sense that I always use Lisa Nichols' example of the cup and saucer, because we talk about self-care and filling your cup, but she shared it in a way with me that changed my life, in the
Yeah.
sense that it's the cup and saucer, and you have to fill the cup to overflow, and you feed others from the saucer. And so, but your cup is empty every single day. Every day you start over, it's a brand new cup. And so it's your job to fill that cup. And when I really started to look at that, it was like, okay, what do I need to fill my cup? And then how do I put boundaries in place for that to happen? So this might sound like a really simple example, but if journaling or meditation, or walking first thing in the morning supports you, and that is something that really fills your cup, then scrolling on social media for an hour is not going to help me fill my cup. It's actually going to empty it. And so, what
Mm.
boundaries do we have to have in place? It's things like notifications off, it's, phone off by certain times. It's honoring what I need on a regular basis. And then when I don't, it's also that piece of ownership that, yeah, this was me. I did that. I did that. And victim mindset is something that I think we all can relate to. I mean, I lived there for a really long time. I know that space really well. And
Mhm.
no change happens there. None. No change will ever happen in that
Yeah.
space. You just keep feeding on the story. And so that would be the other piece on boundaries that I would catch with myself. So the way I explain it is ownership. When we take radical responsibility for ourselves, and blame sit on opposite ends of the spectrum. So whenever I found myself in a space of blame, it was like, oh, Marsha, this is not where change happens. Like, so what boundaries are you missing? How can you shift this? What can you do? And so it sounds like it as I'm saying it. I had a lot of conversations and dialogue with myself in the beginning, and I really got to, take that look in the mirror and recognize what was working and what wasn't.
Hmm.
And by letting go of that blame, that actually helped me to move and create change, but heal in so many ways that I don't think I could have ever seen. Forgiveness and forgiving my kids and
Right.
building a better relationship, all those things came from letting go of that victim mindset.
Right. I think that's really good advice because oftentimes when you're going through stuff, like we had already mentioned, you feel isolated and alone already. I think that puts you in a space to start reflecting on people around you,
Hmm.
particularly because when times are good, you don't really reflect on those things. And it's when times are rough when you start seeing the people around you and you go, I felt worse after that interaction, or I feel even lower, or I feel a little bit more motivated today, right? And you
Hmm.
can start to pick up on the energy and the feelings of how did this interaction, was it, conducive to you, or were they not respecting your boundaries in a way, right? And like you said, it's not just surrounding yourself with people that agree with you, but
Mm-mm.
you can disagree, but I think there's types of people that want the best for you, or sometimes they're in their own space.
I think that's a great example that you just said, because when I continue to do that work, I'm not saying I don't make mistakes, because I certainly do, but I started to see people differently. And I started to see that, um, I could look at somebody and watch their reaction and recognize, wait, that's not about me. Like, that person is like, they're always angry. They're always angry.
Mm,
They're always holding on to something. The old
yeah,
me was like, "Ooh, I need to help them see it differently. I need to help them to," and then I hit a point where it was like, not my job. Just not my job, because it's not, we
yeah,
can't take it all on, because when we take it all on, we lose ourselves in the process. So I think that was the other thing, is that I really started to recognize, like, we're invited to fights and arguments all day long. We don't have to be part of them. They're there, but we don't
right,
have to be part of it. And so I would see things
right.
and it's like, that's not mine. Or, okay, like, I don't have to be involved in that. And again, I started to refuel myself, fill my energy, start to feel like, okay, I have better footing, I'm better grounded. And there's another loop for another day. It's like, okay, this works, this does not. This works, this does not. So I think it's also important, when you're in a space of like literally trying to crawl out from, that you do inventory on a regular basis. You check in with yourself and say, what is working, what's not? What is helping me, what is not? And what needs to go, and what do I need to
Mm,
do? And it when you do that, you start to build such a better relationship with yourself. I mean, this probably started a number of years ago, but I still do it to this day. If we are socially in an environment and I can hear how a person is speaking, and it might be very critical, judgmental, whatever, I just look and I'm like, nope. I turn around and I walk. I'm going somewhere else. Nope, not interested. Not interested. I'm just not interested. Whereas an old me would have tried to have a conversation, and now I just look at it and I'm like, not interested. And so that's different. That's saving
mhm,
energy too, because we get to choose what we surround ourselves with all day long.
right. I think that's a great point because something I noticed is you can you get better at it and you start to notice detachment from people when it comes to negative interactions, and
Hmm.
you're almost able to assess it better as to, was this something really about me, or was it something that they're projecting onto me that they have yet to discover about themselves. And often it's the latter, if it's a negative interaction with somebody's. But yeah, that self work is, I think, what gives you that ability to reassess situations and realize it's not always on you.
Mm-mm. This self work, self awareness, all those self pieces are huge. And the self awareness is really, I find that that is something that is an interesting trait that not everybody has. And again, still always a work in progress, but I can see things now. I can hear it. And I'm like, oh, but I can also, let me just clarify, I also hear it in myself. The second I'll say something and it's like, "Oh, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, that's a what are you doing, Marsha?" That's like a victim way to talk. And that's so that self-awareness is not
Mm,
used to judge others, it's used to catch behaviors in myself too. So I believe self-awareness is a really important tool, right? Because sometimes we hear people say things and it's like, wow, did you mean to sound that mean? Like, is that what you like? I don't say that, but I'm listening to it and I don't know if
mm,
everybody has that level
yeah.
of self-awareness that maybe that's not really an appropriate way to speak or to treat others.
Right. It's and like we had mentioned prior, I think in order to develop that superpower, you have to go through those hard times. And that's I think that's why not everyone has developed that yet, is because it's not an easy journey to go back and look at all the problems in your life and come to terms with that some way or shape or form you had a chance or a power to change that circumstance, or at the very least the mindset of that circumstance. And to swallow that pill is a very big pill to swallow.
It's so true because there comes a
Yeah.
point where you recognize that you're the common denominator to every single thing in your life. I'm not saying you're at fault or that, to shame yourself, but you're a common denominator that is in every single situation. So sometimes it comes down to recognizing that, ooh, I have to create change. And it's interesting because I spent a very long time trying to change my kids, like literally trying to stop behaviors, change them.
Mm,
And not because, really because I wanted to save them. That's really what it was. I was scared. I wanted to save them. And the only way I could finally do it was to detach and like learn how to still love them, not try and change them, and let them have their journey. And I know that sounds very easy. It was not. It was not. But I read a book for anybody who might be on that path, and it was probably a decade ago. And her name is Libby Cataldi, and it's called Stay Close. And it was understanding how you can still stay close energetically. You can send good wishes, like send love, but really respect your boundaries at the same time. And that was such a game
mhm.
changer for me to be able to learn how to heal and then still be there to support them in some way, shape, or form.
Right. I think family is often the hardest to deal with because you don't get to choose your family, and you have to deal with, you know, letting setting those boundaries in place over time, and that can be very difficult.
Very difficult. And it's a case where I had to learn how to not be that almost puppet trying to control, fix, and manage everything. Doesn't mean I don't still struggle with it. Don't get me wrong, I'm a mom, it just happens. But it's recognizing that it's not helping, right? It's not helping and not serving them. And so learning to change that thinking, a lot of things changed when I started to do that because that was a case of I started to say the words like owning your choices. So I can't blame everyone else for where my life is at if I'm not going to take responsibility for where my life is at.
Mm,
I had to do that. And so I would stop when things would happen. I would say, wait, that's not your choice, Marsha. That's not your choice to own. But what is your choice to own? And I used to say those words over and over. And then saying to them in a space that where you are in life right now is a collection of all of the choices that you've made to get here. If you want something different, you just have to make different
mhm,
choices. But it's really important to say this, doing that without adding shame, judgment, and criticism, right? Like for a long time, I did that with them, which is really, I'm sad that I did that, but I didn't know any better, but I did that. And that doesn't create change. There's no human on this planet who is going to change a behavior when you shame them. It's just not going to happen. So I had to learn how to detach from that and love them as they were, but empower them to create some change in their life.
Right. And coming from the perspective of, the other side of the table here, as the child in such an interaction, obviously I think something that helped me is to understand that they're coming from a place of love. They want what's best for you, but sometimes they don't know entirely what that is because it's not their life, it's yours,
Hmm.
right? So being able to detach in that circumstance, because I think sometimes it can give you frustration of the situation, right? It's you understand it, you're aware of it, but you can't change other people. You can only change yourself, like we've been talking about, your own
Hmm.
mindset. So a big
Hmm.
thing for me was to accept that everybody's on their own journey, and ultimately, in most cases your family does love you. They just may not know either how to express it properly, or that they're not even aware what they're doing, but they want what's best for you, you know.
I think that's very fair way to say it. And
Mhm.
I also openly many times admitted I made mistakes. I did. I made mistakes because kids don't come with a manual. And I often said that if ours definitely didn't come with a manual with what we walked in. And it's they did not.
Right.
But I also own that I made mistakes. And I think it's important as a parent. I grew up in a generation where that was never owned. There was never an I'm sorry. That wasn't anything that was accepted. It was just, this is the
Mm,
way it is. And so I think it's really important that to own those mistakes when they happen. And how I tended to look at it is like taking that global view. If we actually go in like a micro, like with a magnifying glass and look at our decisions during the day, we're going to find mistakes all day long. But I would stop and look up, and I often called it just zooming out and say, based on what I'm walking through, am I doing okay? And the answer was always like, I'm doing the best I can. I honestly am. But that also means like I did make mistakes. So I openly just said, like, I wish I could have done some things differently, but I often ask, like, was there ever any time that you were unclear about we how we felt about dealing with this, how it was impacting us? And they're like, oh no, we always knew. And I'm like, okay, so I was clear. Like, so it's we just do the best
mhm.
that we can, and you're
Right.
never going to get out of parenthood without mistakes. There's no way. And I think there's some parents who actually struggle with that period, like just with that. I had a
Mm,
conversation the other day with a young mom who has like a 2-year old, and she said, my number one goal is that my child is always my best friend. And I stopped there and I just said, I didn't know what to say at first. And she said, do you have a different opinion? I said, well, it's not that I have a different opinion, but I can tell you, be open to your framework changing as your kids get older, because there was a lot of things I wanted when they were younger. And then there hit a point where it was like, if they're happy, healthy, and alive, I'm thrilled. Like, I'm thrilled. I am actually thrilled.
mm,
That's enough for me. And so, as you go through parenting, it does change what you want for your kids. And a lot of times it's like, I just want them to be healthy and happy and doing something that they love doing.
right. Family is the hardest topic to understand. It truly is, because friends you can assess, you can change, you can you know at to extreme measures cut off, but family's a lot harder to cut off, especially because I think part of it is parents see themselves in their kids, or they want to see themselves in their kids as a reflection, right? They think that their child's success is a reflection of their own actions. And I think that's what probably some of it stems from.
I love that you went here. I really do. Yeah, I love that you went
Hmm.
here because that is actually something that I observed, is that there are so many people that I know personally that their kids' wins, that was their own. Like, that was their badge of honor. My kid went to school, they've got this job, they've done this. And it was a badge of honor that I did that. Like, I did that. Um, and here's my thoughts on it. Not everybody's going to always agree, but if you're going to own all of their wins, then you're going to own all of their losses too. You're going to own all of that. You don't get to pick and choose what you take.
Wow.
You don't get to pick and choose.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to take that as a win, which whatever you can, but recognize that you don't get to selectively choose what you take credit for. If you're going to take credit for the wins, you're going to take credit for the losses too. And I think I saw it on the other side of this, where my one son really went back to school, created a like massive change for himself, did a lot of things. And we were dealing with somebody who was taking credit for that. Like, I did that for him. I did that for him. And I had a really hard time with that because
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you know what? That's his win. I'm not taking that away from him. He did that. I didn't do that. And I remember saying to
Mm-hmm.
him, I said, how does that make you feel when you hear that? He goes, it actually makes me angry. And I'm like, good. It should make you angry because you are the one who did that. You are the one who created the change. You get to own
Yeah.
that win. That's yours. And he's like, yeah, but you guys helped me a lot. I'm like,
Right.
we were supporting you, but you did it. And I think it's really important that we empower them with their wins so that when they get into that next, challenge, they can recognize that they can move themselves through it. I mean, I had somebody say to me once when he had graduated high school, and I said, I was so proud of him because he had gone back, he had done all of these things, and I'm proud of both of them for what they've done. But this one person stopped and said, it's high school. What is he going to do with that? Like, what's the point of that? And I said, you know what? For today, he's alive, he's healthy, he's happy, and he's doing something that we're in a position I never thought we would be. And for today, that's enough for me. And I think that's the other thing that has changed
Mm.
from this journey is really truly finding gratitude in moments that I didn't think we'd ever get.
Wow, that's such a paradigm shift I have never thought about. That's amazing because if you truly think about that statement you had said to accept their wins but also their losses, it almost makes you realize then perhaps the wins weren't mine because
Hmm.
because oftentimes people don't want to accept the losses. They're like, those losses weren't mine. Those are your choices, right? But then that paradigm shift is like, well, then I guess the wins were their choices too,
Hmm.
right? So I think that's an amazing statement. Hmm.
Thank you. Those words saved me. Honestly, they really and to see it in
Hmm.
my kids, it was empowering for them because it was their choices, their
Hmm.
wins that were helping them to create change. And it's interesting because they might end up doing things that you never thought they would do. Like, I have one son who designs and sews clothing that he sells and created his own business. I
Oh
mean, he
wow.
was the jock all the way through. He
Hmm.
was nothing even close to that. And he's taught himself how to do it and he
Hmm.
loves it. And I remember him once saying, is this what you thought I would do? And I'm like, you're the happiest I've seen you in a long time. I'm thrilled. I actually am thrilled. And I think that's the piece that is something I learned from my journey is I don't care what anyone else says because if we can build the fact that we can rebuild a relationship, there's respect there based on what we walked through years ago. I I'm thrilled with that. Like, I'm so grateful for being able to have that. That is not something I ever thought would be possible.
Hmm. And I think having a support system is so crucial to doing things like that because only two things come out of it, right? Self doubt if you don't have a support system, and then the other part is enforcing boundaries and having to cut people out if they don't, have that support for you in what you're pursuing. So support
Mhm.
systems are so crucial.
They're so crucial. And I think that we can all recognize that there are people in our lives that maybe don't always have the best intentions for us, but we're still learning for something from them every day, right? We're learning, like, everybody is teaching us something. And that's the other way I look at it. Everybody's teaching us
Hmm.
something. And it's when we get curious about those questions and we start asking, it's like, oh, interesting. They're teaching me this. How I respond to it is my choice too, right? So I do believe that even for people
Hmm.
that don't serve us well, they're still teaching us something.
Right. So, through this journey that you've been on in self discovery and such, did you go to therapists, coaches? What external resources have helped you along this way?
All of the above. Everything you just said.
Mm.
I did. I spent a lot of time trying to find different counselors, different support. For me personally, it wasn't helpful in the way that I had found it. I did find crisis counselors. And to me, the crisis counselors were a
Mm.
game changer because I know this sounds, just being completely honest, sitting in a counseling session for an hour, rehashing everything that had happened wasn't helping me in a sense because I wasn't talking about a problem that was long gone. We were still in the middle of chaos. And it was like, okay, great. I don't have time for this. Like, I
Mm.
need actionable tools of what to do next because the second I go home, I'm probably walking into another gong show. And so I really got curious and I found crisis counselors in our area that would have like 20-minute sessions, and I could walk in with like, this was the scenario, this is what happened, this is what happened, how can I handle this differently next time? I learned so much from them on boundaries and safety and my response and how to show up, how to speak for myself, how to be an advocate. So they were life changing. The other thing is I really started to
Mm.
invest in mentors, different coaches, events, groups, connecting with other people. And then we also had a lot of benefit from support groups. We entered a few different parent support groups. That actually took a lot of work. I'm not, so again, stay open if you're looking for support. You might have to s- keep looking to find what you is going to support you. So we found a few different like AA, Al-Anon programs, and honestly, it was really tough because they were very much sitting in the experience that we had, sitting and rehashing problems that were decades old, decades. And I'm like, okay, but we're in the middle of it. What do we do now? And so we found a parent support group, which was one of the best things we'd ever been to. Two things happened there. A, we learned we weren't alone. B, we walked in that room and it was one room in one center in one portion of our city, and the room was packed on one night of the week. And that's when we
Mm.
walked in and went, oh, wait, this is not just us. Like, this is not just us. We are not alone in this struggle. So putting ourselves into those environments really helped. And then, as much as possible, I would say putting ourselves into situations with the school, with police, where we were having like very open conversations and saying, look, we're asking for support because we need help. This is not working. And so those were some of the other things that we had
Right.
to do. I kept digging. I just kept digging and became ruthless in looking for solutions.
Yeah, I often think, when you go to a counselor or a therapist just to open up with problems, it almost just reopens the wound and kind of puts you back in that mental state of where you were, right?
Hmm.
It's the same thing as sitting alone, just thinking about it and just festering and, you know, sizzling up in those emotions and not getting anywhere. Um, and I think a really unfortunate byproduct of going down that loop is, because the human mind likes to find the shortest, least path of resistance, and
Yep.
oftentimes that's substances, drugs, alcohol, and it gives you that temporary escape, and then it creates the long term dependency, and
Hmm.
that's that's why I think it's so important to have conversations like these because it's normalized. It's so normalized that, go to happy hour, go drink your problems away. Let's do it together and laugh about it. But at some point that catches up to you. You can only escape that for so long until even those aren't doing it anymore and you're like,
Hmm.
"Okay, what is going on? What's wrong with me?" Yeah.
I think what you just said is really powerful because, especially coming off of the last 3 years, um, numbing
Mm.
our problems, blowing up from our emotions, we've normalized it. We've just absolutely normalized it. Like, the way the behavior and some of the things that we have normalized is not serving us long term, but it is really something that amplified these last few years. And I've had so many people reach out and talk about, the amount of normal drinking that they were picking up during the day while they were in the pandemic. Substances actually, I couldn't get to the gym, couldn't get to a health food store, but you could get to any kind
Mm.
of liquor store, or they were
A
all
liquor
open,
store. Yeah.
right? Everything was open, but the things that could
Yeah.
support us were not. And so it really only fed that. But I do think these are conversations that we keep, that are really important for us to keep having, because we're just still scratching the surface of a lot of these things. And it's really, recognizing that I know it's uncomfortable to feel those emotions. Trust me, my skin crawls. I don't want to half the time, but delaying it only
Yeah.
amplifies it, right? Delaying it just amplifies it and makes it worse. So it's easier to sit in the muck a little bit and work our way through. I often said that when I wrote my book, that I had to learn how to walk through the muck, like on my, almost on my hands and knees, in order to get to the other side, almost feeling like I was suffocating sometimes. Whereas the few years before that, I pretty much stood outside of the muck and tried to make it look pretty, make it look better, make it be not as bad as it was,
Yeah.
but avoiding going through and doing the work. And if I would have understood that sooner, I would have definitely saved myself some time.
Right. I think one of the hardest lessons I had to learn was the the problems that come with holding your tongue when you should be communicating, but you just hold it in. You don't communicate. You don't say anything,
Hmm.
and oftentimes the result becomes far worse when you don't speak on it. When you try to run away, because you're all that's happening is you're building time for that to become stronger and more
Hmm.
powerful, and either you blow up something, something that you couldn't imagine occurs, and yeah, it's that's why I think, the escapism. Oh, and it doesn't even have to be substances. Oftentimes it could
No.
be watching Netflix all day. It could be, it could
Phones.
be on social media all day. There's so many yes, there's so many ways to escape that we don't even realize that these emotions bottle up or the communication is severed because it's uncomfortable. So let's go to something that's more comfortable. And I think
Hmm.
that just you're just wait. It's a ticking time bomb. You're waiting for it to just blow up.
And that's exactly what happens. Eventually, you'll get the one trigger that you lose it and it blows up. I've done that. And you
Mm.
think that trigger is the problem. That trigger is like the very tip top icing of shoving things down for so long. So the triggers, we a lot of times we believe the triggers that we're experiencing are the problem, but they're not. They're like years of unresolved dealing with those emotions, with those feelings, with those experiences. And I think that's the, my soul led me to do some work with NLP so I could understand it, and it really helped me to release a lot of stuck emotions that I didn't even know were there. And I think that's the piece is that, we think we can just skip through steps, right? We can just work harder, push harder, do more and skip through steps, and you can't. You
Mm.
just can't. You can, but then all of a sudden something's going to happen and it's going to be too much and your body's going to say, "No." It's going to snap and say, "That's enough. I don't want to do it anymore." So it's like we can't skip over those steps of healing. And then I'm taking it back to the very
Mm.
beginning, as we talked about. I think building that relationship with yourself, checking in on a daily basis, what's working, what's not working, how am I feeling, how do I want to feel, what is supporting me, what's not, what boundaries do I need in place, is a way to really check in on a daily basis. And then whatever's not working, having the courage to say, "That's not for me. That's just not for me." We said goodbye to a lot of, didn't actually even get to say goodbye, but we had a lot of relationships and friendships severed during those years. And I just had to get to a space of not holding on to anger and frustration of that and just say, "That's, again, I don't need to hold on to that. This is about you trying to survive right now. And that's all that matters." So trusting
Mm.
that you're going to lose a lot along the way, but what you can gain is like 100 times more beneficial.
Right. Yeah, I keep thinking the hardest part is the daily incremental changes. It just doesn't. I think as humans, we like to see instant results, and
Of
seeing that
course.
delayed gratification of all that time and effort you put in finally pays off is obviously it's rewarding when it happens, but getting there, like you said, going through the muck and crawling your way through is a lot of work.
Mhm. Yeah,
Takes a lot
we
of
we
power.
want it faster. Of course we want it faster. We do. But I think it's so important
Right.
that if you want lasting change, it's not gonna come fast. Like, we can all have the wins, but if you don't do the work to sustain it, then it'll fall and lose it. And I often say, like, I started my solo book was in 2017. My podcast launched after that, 2017, 2018. And both have really helped me to do the work that I get to do today. If the universe would have showed me back in 2016 what I was going to get to do because of it, I guarantee you I would have self-sabotaged. I guarantee it, because I wasn't ready for it. And I
Really?
would, yep, because I was not, it would have overwhelmed me. I would have felt not worthy, not ready. And that's why we have to grow into a version that can sustain what we're building. It's not about, we don't, you said it exactly. We can all get quick wins. We can get things fast. We can get them, but then we can just lose it as fast too, right? Like, it's not sustainable. And to balance out our nervous systems, to balance out our energy, we need things to be more neutral and more sustainable than we need the peaks and the valleys. And that has always been my thing. So even when I want to know what's coming next, which I do every single day, not lying,
Mm.
um, I remind myself that I'm not meant to know, and I am preparing for whatever is coming, right? I'm going to be ready, but it's my job to
Mm.
grow myself into that version.
Wow, I like that. The idea of growing into the identity that you are your next stage of who you're meant to be. But I could see how looking backwards could be very overwhelming and self-sabotaging because especially when you're already in that loop, seeing the version that you could be only would make you feel even worse of where
Mhm.
you are.
Mhm.
Mm,
So true. It's so true.
that's so powerful. Yeah. So, Marsha, I want to ask you one last closing question. This show is called Learn or Be Learned, so I like to ask the guests what is one big life lesson that either you learned from somebody or you want the audience to learn from your own life?
Well, I think it's one that carries both ways. I have learned the power of our stories and how connected we are and how similar like we are. We're far more alike than different. And I would love the listeners to learn
Mm,
that they are not alone in their stories, that someone, right? I would say someone somewhere is praying for the solutions you're holding on to. Don't let yourself be defined by your story, because it's just that, it's a story. It's just a story. It's shaped you into who you are today. Don't give that story so much power and identity, because it's not who you are. It's just what you walked through.
mm. So then what does define you? Is it your values?
I think it's values. I really strongly believe that knowing who you are is your values. Now, values, I'm going to clarify for a second, because a lot of people will write down their values, right? And it's a great place to start.
Mm,
But do you actually live into them? Like, do you actually live into them? You
mm,
can't have boundaries until you know what your values are, because you don't even know what you're saying yes or no to. And so I think that values come first, but it's not about actually just writing them down. It's about living them. So if I can give a quick example, if you say health is your number one value, but you do every single thing possible to self-sabotage your health every single day, then you are not in alignment with who you say you want to be. And it's interesting, because then what happens is that you're not in integrity with yourself. And so you're in an unstable space, which makes it really hard to make decisions and respond to what life is giving you. So I think it's values, and values, you don't need 20 values. Like, a couple of key values are really where it comes from. Knowing what those are, and then that helps to position you of what you say yes and no to all day long.
right. And I think another important thing is in order to find your values, you often have to self-reflect on what identities you want to be known as, right? Through
Mhm.
yourself. If you value health, then that must mean your identity is someone who is athletic, or you see yourself as an athlete. And only then can you shape your values around those identities.
That's a great point. That is an absolutely a great point. And your identity can change at any time, right? It can change at any time. So I think coming back, what's actually can be challenging is setting those values and really checking in and making sure, are they your values or are they what you think your values are supposed to be, right? Because everybody wants to say health,
Yeah.
but are they actually
Yeah.
your values or are they what you think you're supposed to say? And sometimes it's like really getting
mm,
to the root of what is that and understanding those values and saying what it is. Like if you are a person who your top value is money, then say it. Like just don't pretend
mhm,
and don't make it sound like what you think it's supposed to sound like. But when you get a better idea of what those values are, then it's really powerful how much your life can change and how you respond to all of your situations around you. Again, what you say yes and no to. I mean, I have mine, and there are times where I'll get a question for an opportunity or something will come up, and I will look at it and go, do I want to say yes or no to that? Is that the right fit? And immediately, sometimes it's like, oh, can I do that? Like, that's a little bit outside of my comfort zone. But I will take a look and it's like, I already know the answer because there's my values and this is what's important to me. And that means that sometimes we're going to say no to things that people are going to think, are you crazy for dropping that or not doing it? But if it's not the right fit, it's really important to know who you are and what you want to say yes and no to every single day. I I cannot stress that enough. When I first started this journey, I did a workshop on core values probably like 14 years ago. And that was a moment where I was like, wow, there's a lot of things in my life that are not lined up. No wonder I'm frustrated. No wonder I'm in this
mm,
space. And so, doing work on core values, I would say, is a great place for anyone to start because the more you can get to know yourself, the more all aspects of your life can thrive. Whether it's business, personal, you just get to know what works for you, what lights you up, what drives you. And then you can build that relationship. It gets so much easier to continue to move forward whether it's through the wins or the challenges, right? Because I think the other thing with values that's important is that um, it's great. We're all like, if we're doing well and we're winning and things are going well in our life, I don't think that's what defines who we are. I think we are defined by the difficult times, right? The challenging times that we walk through. That's what defines us.
right.
And so I think that comes back to values too.
Right.
Sorry, I'm very passionate about values.
That's so true because yeah, no. I think that's a great point because I think a lot of us have a fear of thinking big. And if you look at
Oh,
winners who
mhm,
have achieved major wins, they think big. And in order to think big, they had good values. And in order to
mhm,
have strong values, they had to go through a lot of self reflection of what happened in their life and take accountability for it. And I think that's
mhm,
truly where it stems from, the fear of, a lot of people can say, I want to be the, next Joe Rogan, or I want to be the next Kobe Bryant, or, I want to achieve these big things. But, truly what comes with that is the understanding of yourself and understanding of your
mhm,
values. And I think oftentimes, in order to know what values you want, you have to experience the lack thereof to see, like, okay, this is what I value, and I
mhm.
understand why I value it, because without it, this is how I felt, right? Without the support system, this is how I felt. So I value truly supportive people around me. And I think that's, it goes back to the beginning of our conversation, how self-work builds upon all these things.
Every single thing you said there. So it's so powerful. It really is. And it's usually our fear of success that actually stops us. It's not fear of failure. It's fear of success. Who am I to? Can I actually do this? Like that self-sabotage sets in, like the doubt sets in. And that's deep rooted in our subconscious. We've had our whole life to build it. We've built it. It's like,
Mm.
it's literally, your subconscious mind is like the hard drive on your computer. You've taken snapshots of every single thing that has happened in your life. So you can have this dream for a goal to go after, this level of success, but deep down, if you're not working on that inner to really see your own blind spots, you might get it, but you won't sustain it. You have to grow into the version who can hold that level. That's really the only way, because nobody wants, we've all had something where we've gained it and it's been a win and then it's gone. And it's like, what happened? Why
Mm.
did that go? That's that level of self-sabotage, right? You will
Right.
take it to 95% and then it's like, oh geez, that's scary. And we do something to let it go. And so
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's, yeah, you take the foot off the gas a little bit because you're scared of reaching that next milestone. Why do you think that is, that people are so afraid of success? Because, it almost seems counterintuitive, right? It's like, well, success
Mm.
sounds great,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So then what really is it? Is it that you have to turn into someone you're not right now?
I think that is like one of the best questions that I've ever been asked. And I love this because I'm just going to follow my gut on it, because I've been there, right? I've been there and I've
Okay.
done this, and I've
Mm.
firsthand have done it. I think that we can't predict what it's going to look like when we get there. We look at other people that maybe have achieved what we say we want, and maybe they're not the kind of people that we want to be, or maybe they don't have the same values, right? They don't have the same values. And I
Mm.
think then it becomes like, but I don't want to do it like they did. You don't have to. You don't have to. So I'm gonna give an example. I have some people in my life who very, very, very much value money, and I think that money is a fantastic tool. Don't get, but they also value
Mm.
the different things, like the bigger houses, the bigger cars, the big things. That doesn't mean anything to me, and that's just a thought and opinion. As my husband and I always joke that, like, if I had the cash in my hand, do I want the really big house? Do I want? And I'm like, I actually don't want it. Actually, it's not what I want.
Mm.
But if my picture of success is only that I think I have to become that, or that's who I'm going to be if this happens, then I
Mm.
will again take it to 95% and probably self sabotage every single time. And it's been a learning curve for me to understand that, you know, I walk a different path. I help people write books. I do coaching. I do podcasting. They're not all incredibly lucrative ways of building a business and creating a legacy. Does that mean that it's less valuable than what others are doing? No, it doesn't. But it's my value, and that's what's important. So I think what happens, I hope that example makes sense. It's, what does that picture look like? I don't want to be how someone else is, or can I actually do it, because I've never done it before, right? Our subconscious mind, this is a really tough one. Our subconscious mind will go back to what's familiar. It'll always go to what's familiar. So if your familiar is struggling, being miserable, not having enough, not making ends meet, not having good health, if that's your familiar, that's what you will work back towards. Even if you say, but that's Marsha, that's ridiculous. I don't even want that. It doesn't matter. That's what normal is. You have to create a new familiar. You have to create a new familiar, and that means you have to be able to do some of that subconscious work to change that story, and then create a new familiar of what you're going towards. So it's, I hope that answers your question, but it really comes down to, like, what, getting real with yourself on what is blocking you.
Right. That's very true. I think part of it is you have to create a new baseline of, you know, that zone of comfortability. You have to create a new baseline there, and perhaps part of it stems from understanding subconsciously that we have to sacrifice certain things to get there.
Hmm.
And as humans, we're uncomfortable to change, and we prefer
Hmm.
comfortable we prefer our comfort zones.
Mhm.
So, like you said, creating that new zone of comfort requires you to drop certain things and sacrifice certain things that for a chance, because you don't know how it's going to play out, how it's going to turn out. But, I think through this journey, something that's super important is to just think in a way that makes you believe that it'll turn out better than you can imagine, because the
Mhm.
alternative is thinking negatively, and that's only going to, when you think negatively, it's 100% going to happen. When you think positively, in some way, shape, or form, you'll create some sort of positive change, right?
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I do believe that I believe that to be very much true. And the more you build out that comfort zone, like you stretch it, like if you're coming from a comfort zone that's this small right now, if you stretch a little bit, then all of a sudden you start to build some trust within yourself that, okay, I did this. Like I've come a ways. All right, what's the
Yeah.
next step? And what's the next step? And when you build that trust within yourself, then you really can take more and more steps. But I do think, and I was this person, I do think a lot of us are sitting and waiting until we're comfortable to move. And that you're
Mm,
never going to be ready to move. There's never a perfect time. There's never a time where it's like, "Oh, I have every single thing figured out." Because I think if you think you have every single piece figured out, and then you take the first step, the universe is going to go, okay, well, here you go. How about this? And it's like a complete curveball. And then it's like, well, I don't know how to handle that. So I'm going to step back
right.
into my little zone. So you're not meant to figure out all the steps. You're meant to keep moving with intention for what you are here to create. And I think that we are all here to create something, to be of service, to make a difference, to make an impact. We all have gifts. I think every single one of us does. We just get to decide if we use them or not. And I think that I would say it comes down to
Mm,
it. Like, I can't use your gifts, Shiva. You can't use mine. So if you choose not to use yours, they go
mm,
untapped. And who else is being impacted
mm,
because you're not using them? I think that's the other piece I always come back to. Who is not being impacted by me not sharing? And that keeps me going more than
right.
the fear of what people will think or say.
Right. And I think what we're talking about goes perfectly hand in hand with the example you gave earlier about if I had known who I was going to become in a year from then, I would have self sabotaged, right? Because negative thoughts will 100% manifest in itself, but positive thoughts will transmute in some way in your life. Like, for example,
Hmm.
you know, if you thought, I could never do this, I could never become a podcaster, well, you won't, right?
Right.
If you don't
That's
think you
right.
could, you won't. But if you think I could do this, well, perhaps maybe that wasn't meant to be your path, but then through podcasting, you found that you loved communication, and then you became a communication coach and you loved
Yes.
that, right? So I think that's the perfect example of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. You just have to move. You just have to move. And when you have that drop down of what you want to do, I think it's really, I often call it you get this like nudge from the universe, and it's a conference call. It's telling you like what your gifts are. You get to decide. And be careful who you take that to, because not everybody's going to see it and not everybody's going to agree with it. When
Mm,
I first said I wanted to write a book and start a podcast, 99% of people thought I was nuts. You know nothing about that. And I'm like, I know, but I think I'm supposed to.
right,
I could have taken that
right,
and went, "Oh, wait, well, they all think it's a bad idea. I probably shouldn't." And I look at it now and I'm like, so when I doubt myself now, we all have evidence. Go back and look at a time in your life when there's evidence there. I look back at that person 5 years ago who decided to do it, even though everyone thought it was crazy. And I just think I wouldn't be doing anything I'm doing today. So keep following your path, because, again, people are going to come into your life. They might mean well, they might mean their best, but don't let them stop or start you. Like, check in and make those decisions yourself.
right. Well, Marsha, thank you so much for being on this show. I had an absolutely great time. I think our conversations are going to help the audience quite a bit.
Thank you so much for having me, Shiva, honestly, and for asking such like deep questions. I love the conversation.